Kamen Rider Kuuga in the Marvel World. Chapter 11. In response to fifth generation's inquiry, Jarvis stopped speaking, seemed to be thinking, and then said, "The gentleman asked me to pay attention to his physical health, so I did not deal with the harmless tiny elements in the body. But it is true that the palladium in the gentleman's body elements do have an upward trend. This is not easy to deal with. The palladium element in the arc reactor is really causing damage to Tony's body. It's still very small now, but if it is discovered later, there will be big problems." The fifth generation also thought about it, and now there are two ways to completely cure it. One is to let Tony have surgery, so that the arc reactor is not needed to maintain life. But Tony seemed to be very resistant to the operation, which made Godai not know how to persuade him, because this operation did have great risks. The second one is to find a suitable element to replace the palladium element. But how can new elements be found so easily? Jarvis, please tell Tony this news. I have woken up, indeed I lacked consideration before. While the fifth generation was talking, Tony walked down the stairs on one side, looking quite calm. It's not that Tony didn't know about the palladium element, it's just that Tony has too many things to think about now, and he can't think about it completely. So I forgot about it all of a sudden. So what are you going to do now? The fifth generation assembled the disassembled old arc reactor, then looked at Tony and asked. I'll leave it aside for now. According to my current situation, it really doesn't work. Before I find a new element, I'll drink some more chlorophyll to ease the poisoning, and then I'll just replace it with a suitable element. Although Tony said this, Tony himself also knows that there are elements that can be replaced. Unless new elements are discovered, how can the arc reactor be built? By the way, don't tell Pepper about Jarvis. I've heard it, Tony, listen to me, I could ignore it before, but now this thing has begun to endanger your life. Who knew that after Tony's words fell, Pepper, who had put on his clothes, had already walked down with a serious face and deep worry and said to Tony seriously. Of course. Pepper also stayed here last night, but after being treated by Tony he woke up when he got up and wanted to follow him over to see what was going on. When he heard such news, Pepper naturally became very impatient. Fine. But I don't want surgery. Don't worry, I'm a genius. Tony hugged Pepper and kissed her. He said seriously. I'll contact the hospital and doctor right away. But Pepper said this, then turned around and left directly, obviously going to find a doctor for Tony. Quote. Tony looked at Pepper's back helplessly, and then set his sights on the fifth generation. Quote. Fifth generation also changed the topic with some embarrassment. It was indeed his own initiative that led to such a situation. But Tony, you are really a genius. You can make this kind of arc reactor, so it should be fine to use a new element. This is the true thought of fifth generation. After all, fifth generation is not very clear about the operation of the arc reactor, but what he knows is that Tony is naturally a genius among geniuses if he can invent such a thing. Change another element, there should be no problem. If it doesn't work, you can replace it with one with lower power. And yesterday's Mark series can be run using the arc reactor installed on the armor. This will not affect the plan too much. Although I really want to admit it, the idea and design of this thing are not my research, but my old man's. Tony spread his hands. Howard Stark. That's genius indeed. Fifth generation also knows a little about the history of this world. Regarding Howard Stark, fifth generation knows it. After all, in this world, he is a figure who can be associated with famous scientists such as Newton and Tesla. He came up with the idea, and I built the first reactor, but it was very big and was in Stark's factory. And this is the second one I made. Tony looked at the old arc reactor that the fifth generation had put back and said as if he was reminiscing. If he was still alive, maybe he could solve it. But Tony, I suggest you keep this issue in mind. You don't want to be able to fight anymore after your Mark series is finished. The fifth generation still gave Tony a suggestion. I know. I cherish my life very much. Tony spread his hands and said. By the way, since Mr. Howard has made an idea, has he also noticed this situation and prepared new elements, or spare elements or something? The fifth generation asked casually. Of course, the fifth generation just asked casually. After all, in the fifth generation's view, since Tony has done it, Then naturally he has learned about it, and he is asking in vain. Quote. But after Godai asked, Tony was stunned, as if he was thinking about Godai's words. Haven't you tried to understand it? Godai looked at Tony with a strange look. According to Godai's thinking, since Tony can make the arc reactor, it stands to reason that he should have read all the information left by his father. He left so much behind that I didn't read much at all. Tony spread his hands and said. Oh well. Godai was a little speechless, but since he agreed to Tony's help, Godai would still do his best. And the fifth generation feels very good about Tony's current change. Now Tony is countless times better than a playboy. There is a special charm. It looks like I need to take a good class these 2 days. Tony said jokingly. But Godai could tell that Tony was serious. It was probably because of the 3-month kidnapping experience that Tony had changed a lot. If it was before, he would not pay attention to these things at all. By the way, Tony, I'm going to say goodbye tomorrow. I'll put a fragment of Dogwaba's belt here for you first. You can study it, but remember not to let the creatures get close to it. Godai suddenly spoke and said. Are you not afraid of those reporters anymore? Tony asked curiously. The faux grunge shows up again and I have to deal with it. Godai shook the phone in his hand. Sokovia. Driving a heavy motorcycle, the fifth generation is driving on a road in Sokovia. There was no one on the road, because the sky was a little gloomy at this time, and there was still a lot of snow and frost on the ground. It's already May, but these parts of Sokovia are still covered in snow, and it will probably take a few more months for warmer weather to arrive. Let's go to the town ahead to buy something. And it should be near here. The fifth generation exhaled when he saw some slightly brighter places in the distance. Fortunately, the fifth generation's helmet is a relatively high-end one, and its ability to withstand the cold is pretty good, so that the fifth generation doesn't feel any cold. However, the fifth generation came from the airport. It has been driving for 5 or 6 hours now, and the sky is slowly getting dark. Tony, what gift are you talking about? Also, are you still not sleeping at this time? Godai asked. If the gift is told to you in advance, wouldn't it be no surprise? Tony's voice came from Godai's ear. When Godai came, Tony gave a headset to Godai, saying that it could help. Godai did not refuse. Well, I entered the city. Godai said. The motorcycle stopped at the entrance of a small hotel that was obviously the entrance to the town. Contact us anytime if you have anything. Tony seemed to have something going on there. After saying that, he stopped talking. Godai nodded, and then pushed away the small bar in front of him. What surprised Godai was that the people in the bar were really quite a bit. When Godai opened the door, everyone looked over. Godai glanced around and found that many people present were looking at him with strange eyes, but he did not speak, but sat on a chair in front of the bar. Give me a glass of vodka. Okay. The bearded store manager on the bar looked at Godai with some surprise, and then poured a glass of vodka mixed with ice cubes for Godai. Godai actually doesn't like drinking, but it's impossible for Godai to order a glass of milk here. Thanks, store manager, I have some questions to ask you, can you? Godai took a gentle sip, letting the vodka stay down his throat. The strong alcohol made Godai's somewhat cold body feel a little warm. Then Godai asked the white-bearded store manager in front of him. Quote. The bearded store manager wiped the wine glass in his hand and did not answer Godai's words. Instead, he just looked at Godai like this. Are there any rumors about some monsters nearby? Godai stopped talking because he felt it. When he spoke, the noisy voices in the bar that had just started suddenly stopped, and it was suddenly quiet and terrifying. And the fifth generation can clearly feel that everyone behind him is staring at him. Sir, don't talk about the rumors. The store manager's voice was also a bit calm and scary as he said to Godai. Feel sorry. Godai probably knew what happened when he heard this. It was probably because of the man-made Gurundi incident. Money is here. Godai took out some US dollars from his pocket, put them under the glass, and left the small bar. Sitting on his motorcycle, Godai lowered his head and thought for a while, then pressed his earphone. Is Jarvis here? Mr. Godai, I'm here. Sure enough, if Tony isn't here, Jarvis will definitely be there. Is there anything going on about this town? Godai asked. It seems that it is unrealistic to understand the situation from the bar in front of him. Hold on. Jarvis responded quickly. 4 or 5 days ago, this town was supposed to be occupied by a relatively large company, but at night a child said he saw a monster, and then a man died on the street the next morning. It really looked like he had been killed by a monster. Killed. Then the company's check-in stopped, and the police were dispatched, but no prisoners were found. Even the man who died tragically on the street fell from the sky and died. Because this company promised to recruit local people as employees, making the people in this small town very happy, but when something like this happened, they were naturally very angry. Quote. Godai sighed, probably understanding what was going on. Has someone died? This is the second time someone has died because of them since the 5th generation began to deal with artificial Gurungi. Start looking now. The 5th generation stood up directly. The 5th generation who originally planned to take a rest was in no mood to rest at all. When the 5th generation was about to summon the belt, a boy who looked only 13 or 14 years old and wore some thin old clothes quickly he ran over with a look of sadness and impatience on his face, and even Godai saw the other person's tears. He almost bumped into Godai, but the boy didn't apologize at all, but walked straight towards the bar and pushed away. He walked through the door and shouted in a crying voice, "The monster took my sister away." Quote. Godai's original intention to summon the belt stopped and turned his head to look over. But who knew that when the people in the bar heard the little boy's shout, they heard the angry shouts of many people. Shut up. You little liar. Get out of here. You stinky beggars, if it weren't for you, our jobs wouldn't be lost. Roll. Immediately, Godai walked over quickly, wanting to see what the situation was, but who knew there was a drunken guest inside who directly smashed the bottle in his hand at the little boy. When Godai saw this, he quickly accelerated under his feet. Appeared next to the little boy, reached out to catch the bottle. You have gone too far. The 5th generation frowned slightly. What on earth did the little boy in front of him do to make these people resent him so much? If it weren't for this little liar we'd all be working right now. Godai heard it. This little boy was the child who discovered the weirdo. Thinking of this, Godai sighed, pulled the impatient little boy out of the bar, took off his coat and put it on the little boy. Don't worry, tell me exactly what happened, and I'll help you. Are you really willing to help me? The little boy, who was a little desperate because of the voices and movements of other people in the bar, looked at Godai as if he had found the light. That's right, tell me what happened. What happened to your sister? Under Godai's comfort, the little boy calmed down a little, and Godai learned more information. The little boy's name is Pietro Maximov. He is now 13 years old. He and his twin sister, Wanda Maximov, live in a small house in this small town. Both are orphans. 3 or 4 years ago, due to an accident, all their family members died, leaving only 2 children who were connected by fate. The pilcher in front of him was the one who saw the monster a few days ago, and it was because of him that the people in this town rejected them. Only then did the 5th generation realize that this town was not at peace. There were frequent terrorist attacks a few years ago, so everyone was not living a very good life. Finally, a company came and wanted to support the town, but who knew it would actually happen? Such a thing. And 10 minutes ago, when little Pietro went to do handyman work for others to make money, he came home and saw a monster waving big wings snatching away his sister. So little Pietro suddenly became panicked. At first, the police were called early, but at this time it was already time to get off work, and little Pietro had no choice but to run to this small bar to find someone for help. Because little Pietro had worked in a small bar for a short period of time before, and many people were drinking here during this time, he had no choice but to seek medical help here in a critical condition. I probably understand, let's go. Let's go to your house first. After Wudai understood the situation, he nodded and said, let me take a look at the scene first. After hearing that Godai was willing to help, little Pietro didn't care anymore and took Godai to his home. Godai directly took little Pietro on the motorcycle and arrived at his home under the leadership of little Pietro. Yes. A very dilapidated small house, probably only 50 square meters at most, and the house was almost collapsed at this time. After putting down little Pietro, the 5th generation went directly into the dilapidated house. Don't let the other party in. After all, it looks like the house might collapse at any time. Feather. Is it a crow? The fifth generation found some feathers in the ruins. The black feathers were very beautiful and looked like crow's feathers. But the flying Gurungi. It's a bit difficult to deal with, but if the golem is still there, you can find it from the sky. The fifth generation walked out with feathers in his hands. Don't worry, little Pietro, I will bring your sister back. Although the fifth generation doesn't have a golem, if the fifth generation can now know that Galangi is a crow, he can still look for his traces according to his habits. And he must hurry up before dawn, because little Pietro told the fifth generation that it is when the sun rises. At that time, the man who was captured before was thrown down and died. I also need to go. Little Pietro followed Godai and said to Godai seriously. Quote. Godai originally didn't plan to take little Pietro with him, but looking at little Pietro's firm eyes, after thinking for a while, he nodded and said, okay, but you have to be obedient. Little Pietro nodded seriously, and then actually took out a somewhat worn-out pistol from the hidden compartment in the ruined room. Quote. Godai looked at little Pietro with some surprise, then patted the back seat of the motorcycle, put on the helmet and heavy clothes for little Pietro, and then drove the motorcycle directly outside. How can I find my sister? Little Pietro asked eagerly. Crows like to build their nests in places with abundant food and in tall trees. The fifth generation also replied, and then a belt slowly emerged from his waist. So, where we are going now is in the nearest forest. If we can't see him there, I will go to the cliff over there to find him. The fifth generation said this, and the driver on his waist released a faint white light. This light is a much needed energy for the artificial Gurungi. 5 generations ago, he relied on this energy to attract the attention of the Gurungi. The fifth generation drove very fast and rushed directly into the forest in 10 minutes. Foo foo foo. The sound of wings flapping slowly came from the depths of the deep forest. Godai could hear it beyond ordinary people's hearing. It was the sound of a huge creature flapping its wings. Hearing this, Godai turned the handle of the car. Pay close attention. Little Pietro was also very obedient and hugged the fifth generation with both hands, and the red gem on the drive around the fifth generation's waist flashed and turned green. Henshin. As the slightly serious voice of the fifth generation sounded. A set of green armor appeared on the fifth generation. When an evil thing appeared, he knew that his shape was better than the other body, and he shot through the evil like a strong wind. He was in charge of the warrior of the wind. Fake. Face Rider Kuuga Pegasus form. Quote exclamation mark. Quote. Little Pietro who was behind was obviously frightened by Godai's transformation and almost let go. Godai said with relief, it's okay. Hearing Godai's still gentle voice, little Pietro felt relaxed and just hugged him. With 5 generations. But after the 5th generation transformed, the huge flying creature that was originally flying here turned around and flew away. Upon seeing this, Godai immediately turned the handle and followed. Kuuga's Pegasus form is a special form that stretches all the nerves in the body to the limit and strengthens the 6 senses. In this form, Kuuga's 6 senses are strengthened thousands of times that of humans, and he can even see infrared, ultraviolet, and electromagnetic waves. His judgment, insight and concentration have become very powerful, which allows the 5th generation to be classified as a flying creature, and the 5th generation's powerful driving skills allow him to directly drive at extremely fast speeds in this somewhat chaotic forest without any roads. The speed catches up with the opponent's speed. Soon Godai locked the shadow of the huge flying creature, and it turned out to be a crow Gurungi that had reached human form. However, Godai did not attack rashly, because Godai saw it. Crow Gurungi was holding a long-haired creature in his arms. Girl. Apparently that little girl was little Pietro's sister. The little girl did not faint, but looked at Godai as if she was petrified. Attack at this distance. The impact is still a bit big, that being the case. Thinking of this, the 5th generation increased the speed of the motorcycle again by a small amount, and soon it was the same as the speed of Crow Gurungi. Gurungi. What a strange human being. Crow Gurungi was obviously a little surprised that the 5th generation could keep up with his speed. Gurungi. What a strange human being. Gurungi. What are you going to do to catch that little girl? Godai stabilized the motorcycle and asked in Gurungi as well, while quietly holding the right hand that was no longer in Kurogurungi's sight. The pistol placed on the outside of the motorcycle. When the fifth generation held the pistol, it quickly transformed into a green crossbow. This was the weapon used by the fifth generation in Pegasus form. Gurangi, humans are my food, and it tastes delicious. Kurogurungi's answer made fifth generation a little angry, but at this time, fifth generation's focus was still on himself, with eyes full of fear. My little girl. Godai focused on a giant tree in the distance, looked at the road conditions, and calculated the distance. Little Pietro, hold on to the motorcycle. Godai told little Pietro. Although little Pietro was worried about his sister, he still obediently let go of his hands around Godai's waist, and instead tightly grasped the rope in the middle of the car seat. And Godai, seeing this, he directly raised the Pegasus crossbow on his right hand, pointed it at Kurogurungi, and pulled the trigger. Kurogurungi didn't have time to react, and he was directly shot through his hands by two energy crossbows. He couldn't hold the little girl in his hands for a while. When the fifth generation saw this, he jumped directly from the motorcycle with both feet. He held the little girl in his arms almost instantly and leaned on the tree trunk on the side. Godai's voice was like a green flash, falling on the motorcycle that was still driving in front of him. The sound of brakes sounded. Godai stopped the motorcycle a short distance away from the giant tree and placed the little girl in his arms on the motorcycle. He breathed a sigh of relief. The two attacks just now did not inject seal energy into the fifth generation. If the seal energy was injected, then the Kurogurungi would explode directly in the attack just now. The explosion of a humanoid creature in front of him, let alone the two children who are only 13 years old in front of him, even an adult will have psychological shadow. Never mind. Godai comforted the little girl and then got off the motorcycle. You two stay here and don't move. Wanda. At this time, little Pietro also held the little girl tightly in his arms, who seemed to be petrified. It does not matter. Godai smiled and gave little Pietro a thumbs up. Little Pietro was slightly startled. After giving a thumbs up, Godai turned around and looked at Kurogurungi, who had fallen on the ground. Kurogurungi is a whole. Although it is humanoid, it only looks like a bird. The face is still a bird's face, and a pair of hand-like limbs extend from the wings. The feet are still bird-like claws, and the claws on them are very large. Sharp. The feathers on the outstretched wings are very fluffy due to the fifth generation's attack. The body is covered with black fluff. The position of the waist is the same as that of the wolf monster seen before, and the golden daguba fragments have even been covered. His abdomen was made of steel. All the wounds from Godai's previous attack had healed. Because of the fifth generation's attack, the Kurogurungi roared angrily, but he did not rush over. Instead, the feathers all over his body were shaking. They were obviously ordinary crow feathers, but at this time they made a hard material collision sound. Then the Kurogurungi directly flaps its wings and flies up. This is the general attack method of birds. It flies in the air and then uses bird pecks or claws to attack people. Fifth generation raised the Pegasus crossbow in his hand. There are no other actions. Suddenly, Godai turned his head in one direction and pulled the trigger. Boo-hoo-hoo, 3 bursts. The Kurogurungi, which flew towards Godai with its claws, was directly shot by Godai's 3 arrows in both wings and in the chest. Then Kurogurungi landed directly on the ground. Struggling to get up, fifth generation put away the Pegasus crossbow and walked to the side of the motorcycle. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Godai's words made the two children look at Godai. At the same time, 3 runes appeared on the body of the Kurogurungi, who was struggling behind him and finally got up. Boom! The huge explosion shook all the snow off the surrounding trees, and the fifth generation also released the transformation at this time. Looking at the somewhat thin little Wanda in front of him, he took off his sweater. Put it on. Little Wanda looked at the very thinly dressed fifth generation in front of her, and asked fifth generation to help her put on her clothes in a daze. You guys wait here a moment. Godai comforted him twice, walked to the edge of the exploded corpse, picked up the fragments of Dagwaba's belt, then returned to the two of them and looked up at the giant tree. On top of the giant tree is a black bird's nest. This is the lair of the Kurogurungi. This is also the reason why the fifth generation did not take action immediately. Is this his home? Little Pietro also looked up with the fifth generation. At this time, little Pietro was holding his sister and wanted to take off his clothes and give them to his sister, but was stopped by the fifth generation. Little Pietro's body was wearing even less clothes than my sister will catch a cold. That's right. The fifth generation nodded, then collected some firewood and lit a fire far away from Crow Gurungi's position, letting the two children sit in front of the fire to warm themselves up. You two should wait here obediently. Godai smiled and rubbed the heads of the two children. Then after the two children nodded in agreement, he turned to look at the giant tree. Godai put his hands on his waist and transformed into a green form again. Then he jumped up. Although the jumping power of the green Pegasus form was not as strong as that of the Azure Dragon form, it was still no problem at this distance. After landing on the top, the fifth generation smelled a very unpleasant rotten smell. There were traces of blood everywhere in the lair, as well as the remains of some human internal organs. It looked like hell. Godai checked for a while and found no relics. There was also a lot of blood, and it was estimated that at least 3 or 4 people had been killed. However, Godai could not help collect the bodies because they were too scattered, and many of them were frozen like stones under this temperature. Godai clasped his hands and prayed for the dead, and then looked at them from above. He jumped down and landed next to the fire while canceling the transformation. Godai looked at the two children hugging each other in front of him with strange eyes, and probably guessed that his transformation might have scared them. But it seemed that he was more out of curiosity, and the little girl came back from her stunned state and looked at Godai curiously. After Godai gently comforted the two children, he was not in a hurry to take the two children away. After all, these were already deep in the forest, and the motorcycle was very fast when Godai came in. But at that time, it was to catch up with Gurungi's pace, but now there is no such rush, and it is impossible to drive so fast on the way back. In addition, the two children looked a little uncomfortable after the wild ride just now and the little girl being caught outside. So the fifth generation just sat next to the two children, trying to keep the two children as close to him as possible. At the same time, the fifth generation also drove the energy in the body to increase the body temperature. The two children also gradually recovered from the panic situation, and they all pressed against the fifth generation. Like an old father, the fifth generation stretched out his hand to gently caress their heads, and then leaned against the fire. It was already dark at this time, but because it was still very cold at this time and the snow was thick, the surroundings still looked very bright. After Godai comforted the two children, he briefly learned about their situation. These two siblings. Or should we say siblings? Anyway, the two children, who had recovered a lot, began to argue about who was the sister or who was the brother. 3 or 4 years ago, an armed force attacked this small town and shattered their originally happy family of 4. The two people, who were only 8 years old, still remember that the missiles falling from the sky had the name, made by Stark, on them. With hatred for Stark, the two became orphans. Normally, the two of them help others with odd jobs. And now their only home has been destroyed by Gulanji. Do you have any other relatives? Fudai asked softly. There is none left. The two of them shook their heads. They had no relatives. In other words, their relatives also died completely in that attack. That's it. Godai nodded slightly and said nothing, but continued to caress the two of them gently. After resting for a while, the two children also recovered a lot of their temperature. 5 generations put out the fire, and then carried the two children one by one onto the motorcycle. As usual, the boy is holding the 5th generation in the back, and the girl is in the front. Hold tight. 5th generation said softly, and then started the motorcycle. Almost forgot. When Godai was about to set off, he suddenly remembered something and turned his head to look at the huge black crow's nest. He slowly raised his right hand, and the moment Godai's palm pointed at the nest, the entire bird's nest burned directly. It quickly turned into a pile of ashes, and then the flames disappeared. On the way back, Wudai took a detour and tried his best to find a road that was not too difficult, but a very stable road. The child quickly fell asleep against his warm body. For a 13-year-old child, today's experience was indeed too exciting. Tony. 5th generation tried his best to slow down his car and click the button on the headset at the same time. Okay. I heard it all, so what? Are you going to blame me? Tony's voice came from the earphones, still sounding so casual. But the fifth generation seemed to hear some different emotions. No. I just want to ask you to help me. The fifth generation has no intention of blaming Tony. Although Tony's Stark company is buying arms, if Tony doesn't buy it, other companies will naturally step in. For example, half a month ago Tony announced the closure of Stark company. In the arms business, an arms company called Hammer came up right away. The business of Hammer's arms company is much worse than Stark's before. All in all, if Tony didn't do it at that time, there would be others who would do it. Besides, Tony has changed a lot now. Let's talk and listen. Tony didn't seem surprised by Godai's words. Can you help bring these two children to New York? Asked the fifth generation. Yes, but you want to adopt these two children. Hi. Brother, I suggest you don't do it. You must know that it will be very troublesome when you want to find a woman. Tony said jokingly. I didn't say I wanted to adopt these two children. Fudai retorted, and then explained. You should have heard what Jarvis said about the current situation. It will be difficult for these two children to live in this small town, and their home has been almost destroyed. I just wanted to take it to New York. My store is still short of some waiters, and they also need to go to school. Quote. After the fifth generation finished speaking, Tony did not reply immediately, but after a while he said directly, okay, the air tickets and immigration certificates are settled. When you come back, just take your identity certificate and go to the airport. Received. This speed is too fast. This is the first time that the fifth generation feels that Tony's money-making ability is indeed very strong. Hey, Godai, you must remember not to say that men are fast. Anything else? Tony said jokingly. If there is anything else, could you please help me repair my motorcycle then? Although this car was customized by me, the material is very good, but the overlanding just now seems to have caused some problems there, and now it is a little shaken when driving. The fifth generation simply explained. The fifth generation actually misses the motorcycle before time travel. Although that motorcycle was only made in 2000, it was a motorcycle made by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department using the most advanced materials specifically for the fifth generation. Maybe it's a little worse in terms of intelligence and so on, but there's absolutely no problem in the direction of hardness, and there won't be any problems when climbing over mountains and ridges. It's not like the car I rode, which just became like this after a deep forest chase. I have always wanted to say, the materials used in your motorcycle are too poor, leave it to me, a genius. I think you can throw away that junk car of yours. Tony also couldn't help complaining. After all, it was customized by me, okay. The fifth generation also retorted, but the fifth generation also knew that in Tony's opinion, his motorcycle was really shabby. But there was no way, who made Tony the richest man in the beautiful country. Fifth generation hung up on Tony's conversation. Although Tony had already said that he could leave directly, fifth generation still had some follow-up matters to deal with, and it would take at least 5 or 6 days before he could return to New York. And Godai placed his gaze on his abdomen. The eyelids of the little girl who was lying in his arms with her eyes closed and seemed to be sleeping moved slightly. It was obvious that he was not asleep, which meant that the other party heard everything Godai said. Godai did not expose the little girl who was pretending to sleep and continued to move towards the town. It only took about half an hour when I went there, and when I came back, it took Godai several hours to get back to the town. After all, the fifth generation has to take a detour and at the same time let the two children have a good rest. So it's very slow. When we returned to the town, it was already dark. The only light was in a bar outside, but even the bar was about to close. The store manager looked with some surprise at Godai, who was wearing a very thin t-shirt, holding a little girl on his chest, and a little boy sleeping on his stomach behind him. Then he immediately asked Godai to enter the room with the two children. It seems that the store manager is not a bad person. After asking Godai to put the two children on the sofa aside, the store manager looked at Godai. Would you like something to drink to warm yourself up? If you can, give me a cup of hot tea. Godai said to the store manager in front of him. The store manager nodded slightly, focusing on the two sleeping children, and then turned around to get busy. He also recognized that this little boy was the little Pietro who came before. But this time the store manager did not say something. After a few minutes, the store manager sat next to Godai with 2 cups of hot tea, handed one of them to Godai and asked, "A foreigner?" "Well, I came from New York." The 5th generation nodded, then looked at the boss. "It's only 11 o'clock now, there's no business in the store." Since they didn't have jobs, they started drinking in the afternoon and were all drunk around this time. If they didn't go back, they would have no money. The boss's tone is still very calm. It seems that he is not talking about his own business. It seems like that incident really had a big impact on the town. The 5th generation nodded to express his understanding, and then sighed. "No, I think even if the factory opens, these people will still be like this, it's just that they now have an extra reason to go out and drink." "You really see clearly, Yusuke Godai." Cat Shri. The two exchanged tea instead of wine, and then smiled. "Your saving Wanda from that monster will lead to more serious consequences." The store manager said, "You destroyed it." It has been completely eliminated by me." "Are you going to take these 2 children with you?" The store manager asked. "Well, I'm taking them to New York. It's not suitable to live here." The 5th generation nodded. "Good choice." The store manager focused his attention on an old newspaper inside the bar. On it was the news that Stark Company was closing its weapons sales department. "One less Stark, now one more Hammer. It's probably not going to be peaceful here anytime soon." "Why are you here?" Wudai asked a rather puzzling question. "Just helping an old friend watch the bar for a while, it's that simple. I'll be leaving here soon too. Go back to where I should go, stay where I should be." Quote. Godai and the store manager stopped talking. After the white-bearded store manager quickly drank up the tea, he stood up and said, "I don't have any extra blankets here. If you want hot water, you can make it yourself later." "Thanks." Tony thanked him, and then watched the store manager reach out and put on a cowboy hat on one side, push open the door at the back, and enter the room. The 5th generation was still sitting in front of the bar, drinking hot tea and not knowing where he was. What to think. Dividing line Wanda. Little Pietro looked for his sister as soon as he woke up. It was already dawn, but the bar was not open. It was also the habit of bars there to open early in the morning. "I'm here." When little Pietro didn't see his sister around, little Wanda's slightly cold voice came from the bar. It turned out that little Wanda had woken up a long time ago. She didn't know what she was talking to 5th generation. She seemed still very happy. Call. Little Pietro was completely relieved when he saw that his sister was okay. He also saw Godai and immediately jumped down from the sofa. Walked to the 5th generation. "Thank you for saving my sister." "Hi Pietro, I'm the sister." Xiao Wanda immediately retorted upon seeing this. "I was obviously born a few minutes before you." Little Pietro complained in a low voice, and then took a look and found that he was actually in the bar. Then little Pietro also remembered that his home had been destroyed, lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Our home is destroyed again. At least we are alive now." Little Wanda comforted little Pietro, then turned to look at her 5th generation with a smile, looked at little Pietro and said, "And Mr. Godai said he wanted to hire us." "Hire us?" Little Pietro looked at the 5th generation. He was deeply impressed by the battle last night, which suddenly made little Pietro lively. "Could it be that they want us to be the logistics for superheroes? I'm super willing. What kid doesn't like superheroes? Not to mention that little Pietro is only a 13-year-old kid. Certainly not. They invited us to work in Mr. Godai's store in New York. There was no salary, but he would support us until we graduated from college." Little Wanda rolled her eyes and said. Although little Wanda had guessed like this when she heard that 5th generation wanted to hire her, little Wanda looked more stable than little Pietro. Quote. New York. Little Pietro was surprised immediately after hearing about New York. He could be said to be stunned and stiffly turned his head to look at the 5th generation. "Sir, is this true?" Godai showed a gentle smile and said, "Your current home has been destroyed by a monster, and that monster has something to do with me, so it can be regarded as compensation." "No, Mr. Godai, if that's the case, I don't think it's necessary, because you helped me save my sister. Where can I expect your help?" Little Pietro said like a little adult even though he was a little jumpy. Quote. Fifth generation was slightly startled, then turned to look at little Wanda. Should I say that they are indeed twins? Even the words are the same. Naturally, little Pietro finally nodded and agreed. Then the fifth generation went shopping in the town and put on some new clothes for the two of them. Then they brought some things back the next day and helped them repair the collapsed old home. No matter what, this is the home of two brothers and sisters. After completing this, the fifth generation also purchased some parts and briefly repaired the motorcycle. After staying in this town for 3 or 4 days, he set off with his two children. It can only be said that the fifth generation's choice was very correct, because when they left, there were still many people scolding the two of them, and even the fifth generation who helped the two people was included in the scope of the scolding. The fifth generation did not go back to New York immediately, and it was impossible to go back because the airport was far away. It took several days to drive here directly from the fifth generation. And now with two children, it was naturally impossible to drive all the way. Resting at night and rushing during the day, it took nearly half a month and 5 generations to return to New York. At the same time, the two children have truly accepted the fifth generation and regard the fifth generation as their elders. Stark. After getting off the airport, while Godai was waiting for the gun and motorcycle to be handed over, the two children saw the news about Tony's interview on the monitor on one side. Something changed in their eyes instantly. Godai looked at the two people's eyes. In their eyes. When the missile explosion took away their relatives, their last impression was Stark's trademark, so naturally the first thing they thought of was Stark, so they regarded Stark as their enemy. But their real enemies should be those who carried out terrorist attacks, but they didn't think about it at this time, or rather. The two of them just regarded Tony as the purpose of their lives and an enemy. Such an idea has been fixed in the minds of the two of them for a long time. If they want to get rid of this idea, they can only let Tony come, or time can settle the matter. Okay, let's go. Godai ruffled the hair of the two children and took them back to the store. It has been nearly a month since Wudai opened a store, and the reporters have stopped looking at this place long ago. So when Godai went home, no one stopped him. You guys will stay in this room from now on. Go clean it up first, and then get familiar with it. You need to study before school starts. Then I will ask someone to give you a good tutoring session. The fifth generation said, pointing to the utility room. There is a bed in that room, and the fifth generation had tidied it up before leaving. At most, there were only some sundries placed in the corner. It was very simple to accommodate two people. Especially the previous fifth generation. I also asked my neighbor Ben Peter to order a bunk bed and it is now all installed. Quote. Little Pietro and little Wanda were not overly excited because it was their first time in a big city like New York, but they still obeyed and went to their rooms. Godai went to the room with the altar as before, but this time he came back without any relics, because even the relics were gone. Godai clasped his hands and prayed for a while before leaving. After putting away the fragments of Dakuba's belt, Godai did not wait until little Pietro and little Wanda felt something strange. He went over to take a look and found that the two children were sleeping on the bed. Come to think of it, neither of them had a good rest after the long journey. In this case, Godai did not disturb the rest of the two, but covered them with quilts, then left his home and went to the New York temple. This time Wudai opened the door and did not see Master Guyi, but a black man who was reading a book. Daniel. Long time no see. How about a vacation? This black mage is Daniel, the guardian of the New York temple. Wudai is relatively familiar with him. After all, they both live in New York. Sometimes Daniel will go to Wudai's restaurant for dinner. I went back to see my family. They are doing well now. Fifth generation, you seem to be getting busier and busier recently. Daniel saw that Godai was also smiling. He put the magic book in his hand together and said with a smile. After all, I caused the problem, so naturally I still have to solve it. The fifth generation spread his hands, and then went up to the second floor with Daniel. Do you want to read the introductory book on esoteric magic this time? Daniel asked with a smile on his face when he saw Godai focusing on the bookshelf. Godai also heard the teasing in Daniel's words and felt helpless. Fifth generation believes that perhaps because he is not from this world, He cannot learn the secret magic unique to this world, but if he can learn these, he may be able to find a way to return to his own world. That's what the fifth generation thought, but after studying for several years, the fifth generation didn't even get started. Still the same. Every time Wu Dai came over to read a book, he would read the most introductory book on learning secret arts. This time is naturally no exception. Good. Daniel brought a thick, ancient-looking book for Godai, and then gave him a cup of tea. Godai sat on a chair aside and began to read. This time you have gained a lot. After just watching for a while, Master Ji Yuyi slowly walked over from the door that opened slowly on one side. Ancient Master, this time. That's right. Are little Pietro and little Wanda special people? When Wu Dai saw Master Ji Yuyi coming, he closed his book and stood up. He asked curiously. Indeed so. But I also said that your appearance has brought the world into a new future, but I don't think this is a bad future. Master Ji Yuyi motioned to Wu Dai to sit down, and Master Ji Yuyi also sat in front of Wu Dai. Tony Stark's fate has also changed. But what hasn't changed is his current heart. The next time the fifth generation has a chance, you can bring those two children to me. Brought here. Wu Dai was a little surprised. Master Ji Yuyi actually wanted to see those two children. Could it be that the future of those two children is very important to this world? Since the future has changed, then maybe that's a good thing too, of course. Or it could be a bad thing. So we have to be prepared. Ji Yuyi smiled and nodded slowly. By the way, have you met with Mephisto's envoy? Mephisto. The fifth generation silently recited this unfamiliar name, but then he remembered the bar owner he met in Sokovia, Katsuri. The fifth generation always felt that there was something very strong in that Katsuri. A strange power, that kind of feeling is rare for the fifth generation. It is a feeling above the soul when meeting a special person, namely Carter Sori. As Mephisto. The fifth generation has heard of Mephisto's name. It is the name of a demon in a game, and the source is the devil in Goethe's work, Faust. He is a demon from the hell dimension. The strength is very strong. Master Ji Yuyi stood up and stretched out his hand across the front of Wu Dai. Several lines formed by energy appeared in front of Wu Dai. This one is our real world, this one is the hell dimension, and this one is the heaven dimension. Master Ji Yuyi slowly told the news about the three lines in front of him. The three worlds exist with each other, but they also resist each other. The strongest person in hell is Mephisto. Many years ago, an angel from heaven broke into hell to save mortals. But never came back. Wu Dai listened very seriously. Although Mephisto is a strong man from hell, when it comes to the material world, his strength is not that good. And I had a deal with heaven a long time ago. So I also made a deal with Mephisto. He can appear in this world, but his body cannot. At the same time, he cannot use any power beyond ordinary people. At the same time, he wants to release the soul of the angel. Angel soul. Godai lowered his head and thought for a while and said, could it be that Mr. Carter Shirey, whom I saw before, has something inside his body? No, not really. That's just power. Master Ji Yuyi shook his head slightly and said, the horror of hell is beyond the comprehension of mortals. Even the highest-ranking angels will fall there. And naturally this angel is the same, but even so, the justice in his heart still exists. Mephisto deals with greedy humans in this world. At the same time, he leads some demons, and once the demons or contractors betray him, he will send the carrier with angelic power to deal with it. And this carrier is Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider. Rider. The fifth generation lowered his head and thought, then raised his head and said, then why does the power in Mr. Carter Shirey's body not seem to be very strong, or even not much left behind? Because this power has been transferred to other people. Ji Yuyi slowly opened an orange revolving door, but it didn't open the door to the secret method, but opened a window that allowed the fifth generation to see each other. On the other side of the window was a man wearing a racing driver's uniform, riding a motorcycle and undergoing special training. Is it him? It seems. Not very. Feeling of oppression. The fifth generation is a little strange. Even the remaining power in Kate Shirey's body is stronger than this, right? Because I haven't awakened yet. Fifth generation, you may need to intervene in this matter. I originally wanted to ask you for help. Ji Yuyi stood next to the window, his dark green eyes looking at Godai. Please say that I have received so much care from you. When Wu Dai saw this, he immediately stood up. He has been under the care of Master Ji Yi, so naturally Wu Dai will also help if he can. There are still a few months. His power is about to awaken. I hope you can help him then. Especially the Covenant of Saint Fangenza. There are too many imprisoned souls inside, and I need to free them. Master Ji Yi said another term that Wu Dai had never heard before. The Covenant of Saint Fangenza. Many years ago, there was a town, Santa Fangenza. A man in the town made a deal with Mephisto and sacrificed all the souls of the entire town to Mephisto, and as long as Mephisto protected the village, the glory and wealth of the people inside. However, you must know. The deal with the devil was a very stupid choice, so a month later, a fire broke out in the entire town, killing everyone, and no one survived. Mephisto sent the Ghost Rider to retrieve the contract. Those souls who own the contract belong to Mephisto, but the Ghost Rider of the previous generation, Katsuri, chose to betray Mephisto. But the power of Ghost Rider lies with Mephisto. So Johnny Brace is the next Ghost Rider, and he naturally has to complete the ability to retrieve the contract. Why didn't Mephisto get it himself instead of letting Ghost Rider do it? Wu Dai asked curiously. According to the ancient master, Mephisto is very powerful, so why doesn't Mephisto set out to get the contract back by himself? Because these powers are not important to Mephisto. He needs the help of Saint Fangenza's contract to eliminate his child, Blackheart Demon. In addition, he is now very old. After Master Ji Yi told Wu Dai some past secrets and finally used his power, the runes of dark power flashing slightly on Master Ji Yi's forehead made Wu Dai completely fall into silence. Master Ji Yi did not say anything. Instead, he silently poured a cup of tea for Godai, then poured himself a cup and sat down, waiting for Godai. I'll help. So it's okay. Master Ji Yi, if you can use me in the future, please do your best to trust me. Wu Dai didn't change his mind because he knew the truth. Instead, he admired Master Ji Yi more and more. So Wu Dai gave a thumbs up to Master Ji Yi in front of him and said with a smile. Master Ji Yi still had that gentle expression on his face. He nodded slightly to fifth generation, then waved his hand, and all the projected light disappeared in an instant. Alright. It's time for the fifth generation to go back. If he doesn't go back, there will be trouble at home. Master Ji Yi said with a hand, and the door downstairs was opened directly. Then I'll take my leave now. After Wu Dai heard Master Ji Yi's words, he knew that something should have happened in the store. He did not delay, but nodded, then turned and left. Ji Yi looked at Wu Dai's back with a slight curl in his mouth. Rise. Warriors who use the power of darkness to fight, travel through time and space, and change the world. The stories passed down in the future will definitely be exciting. 5 generations. Your holy spring never dries up. When Wu Dai returned to the store, he also knew why Master Ji Yi said that there would be trouble at home. Sure enough, Wu Dai stayed with Master Ji Yi for more than an hour. When he went back to the store, little Pietro was quarreling with little Peter. The kind that quarrels fiercely. It's almost time to take action, but now little Pietro is alone downstairs arguing with little Peter, while little Wanda didn't show up, and is probably still sleeping upstairs. Okay, stop arguing. Godai inserted himself directly between the two children and stopped the two children from making noise. Fifth generation had just heard that little Pietro had a lot of hatred for Tony, but little Peter seemed to admire Tony very much and even got Tony's autograph. A child. After getting the autograph, I naturally wanted to show off, and then started chatting with little Pietro, who came downstairs after hearing a strange noise. The two of them were fine at first, but as they chatted, the topic of the Tony came to mind, and then little Peter couldn't stop talking about all the Tony awards. However, these awards aggravated little Pietro's psychology even more. The two of them started arguing and almost started fighting. It's also a blessing that the fifth generation will come back, otherwise, little Pietro, who was an orphan before and went out to work, would definitely do anything wrong. But Uncle fifth generation was clearly his fault. Little Pietro is still a little aggrieved. He feels that although Tony is a playboy, he is indeed a genius. Why does little Pietro dislike him and say that Tony is an executioner? Little Peter, you have to know that no one is perfect. Tony was indeed a genius, but he did invent many new weapons, which led to many wars. The fifth generation did not deny what Tony had done in the past, but smiled and said, but people will always change. Look, hasn't Tony closed down the arms business now? But, even if it is shut down, wouldn't Hammer Company immediately take over? The war and arms trafficking are still not over. Little Peter muttered something dissatisfied. Little Peter was also a little genius, so naturally he knew these twists and turns, but he still believed that Tony was not wrong, because without Tony there would have been other arms companies. Alright. You will figure these things out later. Little Peter and little Pietro have to get along well with each other. Okay, I'll treat you to sweets. Just stop arguing. The fifth generation still has some experience in raising children. In the mask world, his sister Xiaomi worked in a nursery, and at that time he often helped to take care of the children. Naturally, he knew what the children were thinking. Soon the fifth generation, using some of the remaining ingredients, they made a smooth, sweet, appetizing, and fragrant candy. The two children immediately let go of the previous holiday and ate it happily. I heard that Godai was back, so he came to see this uncle who had been having fun, so he went home soon. Godai asked little Pietro to continue to have a good sleep. After all, the two children were running around with him. It's been too long. I need a good rest and adjust to the jet lag. Little Wanda. I also left a portion for you, eat it. After little Pietro went to rest for a few minutes, little Wanda also came down. There was no surprise for the fifth generation. Because the quarrel between the two just now was very loud, so little Wanda must have heard it. Mr. Godai, are you friends with Stark? Little Wanda asked softly, holding the bowl of candy given to him by fifth generation with both hands. Looking at fifth generation. We are friends and we have only known each other for a short time. Why do you feel so surprised? The gentle expression on the fifth generation's face is still. No. I had a guess when I was in Sokovia, whether we could come to New York with Stark's help. Little Wanda asked softly. Even your subsequent school life will be funded by him. Fifth generation didn't hide anything, and then asked, why do you feel that you came in the wrong place? No. But little Wanda shook her head slightly. After experiencing the previous Gurungi incident, she had seen through many things and became more mature. The most precious thing to her now is her younger brother, and after experiencing the attack, on the way to New York, she had a vague feeling that the fifth generation and Tony were very familiar. But she also knew that if she didn't follow Wu Dai, her next life would be very difficult, so she thought about it a lot. Especially after knowing that Stark Company shut down the weapon system, but Hammer Company immediately provided arms, it felt like her thoughts suddenly became clear. Although she couldn't let go of Tony, she also knew that those terrible things were the elements caused the tragedy in their own family. I just think Pietro will probably be very angry when he finds out. Little Wanda knew what was going on with her little brother, and said with some helplessness. Pietro will also know one day, and leave the rest to me. The fifth generation smiled and nodded, then remembered what Master Ji Yuyi said before and asked. By the way, Wanda, do you want to learn the secret technique? Secret method. Little Wanda had just started eating sweets, but then she heard Wu Dai's words and looked at Wu Dai with some confusion. They are the mage who uses secret skills to save the world. You have seen my transformation before, right? I have always accepted their assistance, and the ancient mage who protects this world said that he wants to meet you two brothers and sisters. The fifth generation simply explained. They are siblings. If Mr. Godai wishes it. Little Wanda retorted first, and then smiled for the first time in front of the fifth generation. The fifth generation saw little Wanda smiling for the first time, and he also smiled. He reached out and picked up a tissue on the side and wiped the syrup from the corner of little Wanda's mouth and said. My original idea was to let you two live a very ordinary school life. If you two start junior high school now, it would be more appropriate to meet after you two go to college. But I think Master Ji Yuyi will arrange it. So the choice now is in your hands. No matter what your choice is, I will support you. Thank you, fifth generation. Uncle, I want to go alone. Little Wanda looked up at the young faces of the fifth generation. She originally wanted to call her father. But she couldn't, so she could only call her uncle instead, and then said seriously. Do you want to take it on alone? After hearing what little Wanda said, fifth generation also knew what Wanda meant. However, fifth generation did not agree to little Wanda's words, but said this. But little Pietro will always know, and you two brothers and sisters should work together, right? If you want to bear it all alone, it won't work. Do not worry. The two of us have agreed that nothing will happen to you, it's just simple training. The fifth generation also hopes that little Pietro will study with Master Gu, because if little Pietro finds out later, this lively young man will probably feel very uncomfortable. And the fifth generation is confident to protect them before they fully grow up. Quote. If you really want little Pietro not to join, you two brothers and sisters should have a good talk. I won't let you go so early. You have plenty of time to think about it. The fifth generation did not immediately take the two of them there, but planned to talk about it after the two of them had completely settled down in New York. Little Wanda also knew her brother's character, so she nodded and agreed with Wuday's words. Wanda and Pietro both claim to be older than the other, so everyone only needs to know that they are brothers or sisters. Closing parenthesis. After Wuday smiled and rubbed little Wanda's hair, he tidied up the store. He probably won't open the store right away tonight. The problem with Tony's motorcycle has not been resolved yet, and Wuday also wants to go there. Let's find out how far Tony is at producing new elements and how his body is doing now. In the evening, you should have a good rest, but don't go to Queen Street, because of the money. Here, you can buy some clothes and bedding for yourselves. The fifth generation put some money in little Wanda's hand. After explaining some things, after little Wanda nodded, the fifth generation rode his motorcycle to find Tony. Dividing line dd. On the way to Tony's villa, the fifth generation met Tony, who was driving a convertible, transporting a large model in the back of the convertible. It looks like a model of a venue or something like that. Rare. Did you actually leave your villa today? The fifth generation also set the speed of the car at the same speed as Tony, and said jokingly. Since Tony came back from Afghanistan, he seems to have a phobia of going out. He almost never came out of the villa and has been working on the design of Mark II. Oh, the parts for Mark II are almost ready, now we are working on the design drawings for Mark III. I just thought of something, that old man still wants to teach me lessons after he has been dead for so many years. Tony pointed to the model behind him as if he was reminiscing. Found a way. The fifth generation heard the nostalgia and relaxation in Tony's words. It seems that there is a way to realize the new elements. I guess so. Tony can't guarantee that. During this period, he studied during the day, made up for classes at night, and read the notes left by his father. But he still had no memory, but Tony fell asleep while looking at the information one night. When he was young, he seemed to have made a mess when his father was recording something for him, and then he was scolded. These were the only fragments of the dream, but when Tony woke up, he immediately checked the information and found that the model was in Stark Company. So Tony went directly to Stark Company and brought the model back. When he saw the model, Tony felt that the model was there. Tony didn't know what the problem was, so he was going to study it. But what Tony was a little confused about now was that there weren't many videos left that his father had recorded, and most of them were of little use, or maybe they were useless. It's the video data that has been released. What about the other data? This makes Tony a little concerned, but now Tony still gives priority to the new elements and the steel armor. As for the other data, Tony will take care of the matter at hand. After processing it, we will investigate carefully and find out who took the information. Can you still drive like this? And Tony admired the fifth generation's driving skills. If the fifth generation drove slowly, it would be nothing. Now that the speed of the fifth generation has exceeded 100, the front wheel of the motorcycle is shaking obviously. Ordinary people drive such a car, not it's terrible when it rolls over, but the fifth generation drives very steadily. A simple repair is still possible. The fifth generation didn't care at all. This was actually quite good. When he was in the masked world, the wheels of the motorcycle were bent to an arc again. The fifth generation was stunned to let the fifth generation drive more than 100, and chased Gurungi. All right. Tony said you were awesome, and then the two of them drove faster. However, the fifth generation was still slower after all. Tony drives a sports car, so the speed is naturally much faster. And the 5th generation motorcycles are not as fast as Tony's sports car in modification. Help me. When the 5th generation arrived, Tony was dismantling the model, and the 5th generation also went up to help. After helping bring the model into the basement. Then you should do some research first, and I'll go and do some simple repairs on the locomotive. The 5th generation's drag racing just now caused some problems with the wheels of the motorcycle, so the 5th generation can only repair it first. No, just take a look at the gift I gave you. And Tony took the 5th generation to the underground garage. There was a large iron box on top of an empty parking space in the underground garage. Tony motioned the 5th generation to step forward. Although the 5th generation was a little confused, he still took a step forward. An infrared ray swept down from the iron box that was taller than a person. Identity confirmed. Yusuke Godai. As the sound of machinery sounded, the box slowly opened, and a bright red and black motorcycle slowly appeared in front of the 5th generation. This is. Wudai knew it was a good car at a glance, and turned to look at Tony with some surprise. This is a gift for you. Tony spread his hands. Thank you very much. The 5th generation stepped forward with excitement and walked in front of the motorcycle. There was also a touchscreen control panel. When the 5th generation stepped forward, it lit up directly, and at the same time, another infrared scan appeared. Confirmed driver, Yusuke Godai. I am your artificial intelligence. It still had a slightly mechanical sound. 5th generation touched the car body slightly. What a great car. Thanks for watching.